Welcome everybody to our executive search from Robert Half webinar focused on succession planning and mission critical hiring. In our current environment, two topics that are pretty compelling for both companies of any size and also candidates in virtually every function of a company today. We're very fortunate to have an esteemed group of panelists here. Maybe I'll just wait a quick moment and as our attendee list is growing, and we'll just wait for a quick moment before we introduce everybody. So on our panel today, we have Scott Milligan, who is with Morneau Shepell. His role there is Chief Corporate Officer and Executive Vice President. Wears a few hats. Look forward to hearing about your experience there, Scott. We have Pamela Steer, who is currently the CFO and the Corporate Strategy Officer at Payments Canada. Again, an interesting business that has seen an enormous focus based on where people are spending their money today. We look forward to your comments. And Christine Dacre, who is currently the CFO of Translink out in beautiful British Columbia. Looking forward to your comments as well, Christine. We're fortunate to have this panel, this group of panelists to really offer a range of experience and overview from a number of different points of view and perspectives. Their businesses are all very different, and they've all had to contend with similar challenges related to mission critical hiring and succession planning. So we felt it was important to get a broad perspective, and in turn, the three people represented here are certainly going to bring us that. So we're excited to have all three of you with us today. Thank you. I want to go over just a few points here that kind of prompted us to want to focus on this topic. Our search business today has been very much focused on roles that are non-negotiable. Companies just must have these people in place. And a lot of it driven by current environment, and a lot of it just by not having a well-planned succession situation within their organizations, almost compounded by the current scenario that we've all been living in over the past few months. We recently undertook a survey across Canada, and we surveyed a range of companies as well, not just large companies, but small to mid-size as well. And one of the focus areas of that survey was regarding CFOs. And our finding was that almost 50% of CFOs do not have a proper successor for their role today. And this in itself was a bit eye-opening, and probably is not an unusual situation in normal times. When we're in critical times, it becomes a real issue because we're never sure when someone is going to be winning the lottery, so to speak. We're never sure when someone is going to make that move. A lot of the feedback on that survey was from small to medium-sized businesses. And some of the reasons for that was a lot of people just had no interest in leaving their company. Why would I bother? Why do I need that? And again, around every corner, we don't know what's coming. And that is really not a good answer. A lot of other answers were more related to lack of internal candidates, and which then speaks to development programs and what are we doing with people inside our companies to get them to a state of readiness for the next role. So that whole idea of where succession fits, is it at the executive level or does it translate into many other parts of the organization? And truly it does today. There's many risks, obviously, with organizations that don't have a succession plan. Obviously, disruption to business today is a big issue, and not having that depth of talent can really impact a company's ability to perform and to move quickly when urgent situations arise. There's loss of legacy knowledge once someone does leave. And what are we doing with that? How do we make sure that that transition is sound and there is a plan around that to make it happen? The other point, really importantly, is that it does leave a void. It leaves that leadership void, whether it's in finance or any other major function within an organization. So the whole point of this is to allow companies to have that seamless transition as things happen. And most companies today are seriously examining this as an issue. You know, succession planning can also help you identify where you have holes in your infrastructure and where your recruitment strategy really needs to take a different approach. And of course, succession planning can have a massive motivational effect on employees. So when we're dealing with people internally and we're helping them develop to move to that next role, it says something to those people and allows you to really turn a succession conversation into a development plan, which again is a critical component in terms of retaining talent today, which again, in extreme circumstances as we're experiencing today, has become a major, major concern. So I'd like to introduce the panelists a little bit more completely now, and then we're going to get into a discussion related to this topic. So first, I'd like to introduce Christine Daker, CFO of Translink. And for those that don't know, Translink is the statutory authority responsible for the regional transportation network of metropolitan Vancouver. So this would include all your public transport, your major roads and bridges. And in 2019, it served over 450 million riders. Christine is a CPA with an extensive 15 years of experience in executive and senior level financial positions. And as the CFO at Translink, Christine oversees finance, treasury, budgeting and forecasting, strategic sourcing, capital, long-range financial planning, and a number of other components of her role that we thought were too many to list, Christine. An interesting thing that I think you spearheaded, though, was under your leadership was the issuance of Translink's first ever green bond, which was highlighting a $400 million commitment to the environment and sustainability. It was a very big move. So Christine, welcome. And if you have a couple of comments you'd like to make now, that'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Stephen and Robert Half for hosting this webinar and inviting me to participate. I think succession planning is very important, is a very important topic, as one of the biggest assets in organizations are its people. With our aging population and as people retire and exit the workforce, we need to ensure that there are trained and capable people to take their place. So a bit about me, I've been working at Translink for a total of 14 years. I started at one of the largest subsidiaries, the bus division at Coast Mountain Bus Company. And I started there as Director of Finance in 2006. I moved up in the organization at Coast Mountain and moved up to VP of Finance and Corporate and Shared Services, where we shared we provided the business technology and human resources to the rest of the enterprise, kind of a reverse shared services. Then I moved over to the organization to the VP of Finance, and we did a bit of a restructuring where we had centralized services at head office. In May of last year, I was promoted to the Chief Financial Officer. So I've been very fortunate in my career to work for people and to work for an organization where succession planning was in place. I was given opportunities to gain experience that enabled me to move up in my career and within the same organization. And I'm not sure that I would be in my position today if it wasn't for the bosses that I had and the opportunities that they gave me to expand my experience and gain new skills. Stephen mentioned a bit about our organization, Translink. Just to add a couple more points, we have just over 8,000 employees in our organization.
Oh, you muted, Christine. You hit your mute button. There we go.
So our organization is the governance structures were made up of 3 subsidiaries: Coast Mountain Bus Company, the bus operating company, and then our BC Rapid Transit company. And we also have a dedicated transit police services. So that's just a little bit about our organization and myself. Thank you, Stephen.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Christine. Great introduction. Second on our panel, we have Scott Milligan, who is the Chief Corporate Officer and an Executive Vice President at Morneau Shepell. Morneau Shepell is a human resource services and technology company that's headquartered here in Toronto, that is a global operation, something that Scott is actually very much involved with in terms of the global growth of the organization. Scott's role is he's responsible for basically the company's transformation efforts, as well as supporting, as I said, the global growth of the organization. Scott has brought a deep experience in many senior executive positions and financial management roles within a number of North American-based organizations. He has led the implementation of new finance, HR, and professional services systems, and really is focused as well on this company's social responsibility portfolio. So Scott, welcome, and we really appreciate your time and being part of the panel today.
Thanks, Stephen. And like Christine, I'd like to thank Robert Half and the team for this opportunity. I'll give a quick blurb about Morneau Shepell. So we're just over 6,000 employees around the world now. I've been there 11 years today, apparently, as I was notified this morning. In that time, we've seen the number of employees grow from about 2,000 to about 6,500-ish right now, and move from 95% Canada to about 60 to 65% Canada. So the Canadian business has doubled over that time frame, but the global business is now bigger than what Canada was 11 years ago. So just give you a sense of what we've gone on. I spent my first 10 years there as Chief Financial Officer and moved into this role last fall. And, as we think about succession planning, I think there's a little bit about this particular move for me, but also, I was fortunate enough to spend the formative years of my career at Campbell Soup and at Pepsi, both companies who spent a lot of time working on succession and development of their people. And I was the recipient of good advice and support and great opportunities to move up.
Great.
And with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, third on our panel would be Pamela Steer, currently CFO and Corporate Strategy Officer at Payments Canada. Payments Canada, for those that don't know, was officially established as the Canadian Payments Association by an act of Parliament. They're responsible for the clearing and settlement infrastructure, processes, and rules essential to banking transactions. Approximately, and get me if I'm wrong here, Pamela, but it's over 100 financial institutions representing, thousands of branches, and they all participate in one or more of your systems, for sure. Pamela is as I said, CFO and Chief Strategy Officer here. As a member of the executive management team, Pamela has overall responsibility for the financial and corporate planning functions of the organization. Pamela joined Payments Canada from the Workplace Safety and Insurance Board, WSIB, which is one of the largest insurance organizations in North America, where she was the CFO and head of finance and employer services. So kind of similar to Christine's role back at Translink when you think about it. Pam was awarded the CFO of the Year Award for 2019 for her outstanding leadership and initiatives. Pam, we're really pleased to have you on the panel and look forward to your comments.
Thanks so much, Stephen. And again, I echo my colleagues that it's a pleasure to join and be part of such a great panel. I'm looking forward to the discussion and to learning today. And some of your opening remarks are near and dear to my heart. I've only been at Payments Canada not quite a year yet, so very new. And we did have the lottery. Literally, 4 of our very essential employees about 2 years ago won $60 million. And so it actually does happen. And when they left, it was a very hard lesson, I believe, for our organization. And I'm not sure about this, but I wouldn't be surprised if that really spearheaded a lot of the succession activity that has undergone in the last couple of years. So it's very important, and we've only ramped that up since the pandemic situation occurred. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. I've been at organizations through my career, from just a couple of people as a brand new startup and how do you deal with things there, right through to, of course, WSIB and other organizations that have thousands of employees. And so the differences and similarities, and actually I would say more similarities than differences, that we all encounter when we're looking at succession planning and how to develop our colleagues, is a really important one. And certainly today, Payments Canada, if you don't, it's like plumbing. If Payments Canada doesn't exist, the Canadian economy stops. Literally every payment ultimately goes through our systems. And so for us, it was absolutely critical at the outset of the pandemic to broaden our succession planning and our tree and make sure everything was actually written down. So looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Wonderful. So as everyone can see, we have a great panel here, and it's a varied experience. Some people have grown up in organizations with long tenure, others have made the move from large to small. So the hope is here that we can get great perspective on a number of different points here. So really the first question I wanted to pose was, maybe Christine, give us a sense of, you've experienced succession firsthand within your organization. What has the company done to make this happen? Like, is it a program type approach or a program type, or is it just something that is on the agenda and we do the best we can? So is it formal? Is it informal? Give us a sense of how it works within Translink.
Thanks, Stephen. So right now we actually do have a formal process. We've had it for quite a few years. When it first started, it started as a good robust system, and then we kind of got away from it a little bit and then started it up again. So it's not perfect. You do, as other priorities come into play, you have different focuses and whatnot, but right now we actually do have and we have for a number of years a fairly robust succession planning. We look at like critical roles first. We look at, the top, leadership, but the critical roles. So the critical roles can be any level of the organization. And we actually go through, someone from our HR division goes through and talks to all of those people that manage those critical roles, also talks to the people in those roles, and looks at, is there anyone in the organization? And we don't just look within our own organization, we look at the subsidiaries, we look at it as an enterprise to see if there's anyone, and look at how many years, are they ready immediately? Is it 1 to 3 years? Is it plus 5 years? And we that's how we start, is identifying what those are. When I look at my evolution in this organization, I don't know that I actually really got my promotions because of a formal plan at the beginning anyways. I think I was just very fortunate that I worked for people that they themselves felt it was a good idea to expose me to new experiences, new responsibilities. So from my own experience, it's both. It wasn't that formal plan as much as I was just very fortunate to work for bosses that really gave me the opportunity and gave me the exposure I needed in the organization to move up to the next level.
It's insightful when you are the advocate for your own career, even at a more senior level. And I think that's an interesting part of this from even candidates in the market today, that you do have to own your own destiny within any organization. And I wonder, Pamela, if within the context of two different size organizations, you said similarities when you did your introduction there, how much of this is on the responsibility of the employee versus the formal aspect of what an employer would provide in terms of a program? Have you seen differences between the, let's say, larger organization like WSIB and Payments Canada, which is a much leaner organization?
It's a great question, and absolutely there are differences within a larger organization. I think candidates in particular can get a little lost if they don't advocate for themselves. It's easier to get lost in the crowd and in the noise. So I absolutely, when I talk about development to our colleagues, actually at any organization I've been at, don't ever expect your employer to just tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, time for a promotion, isn't that great? You are your own best advocate, and you have to be willing and able to stand up and say, I have these skills and this experience. I'd like to go in this direction, or I'd like to go in this direction, or can I learn more about, or how can I make myself attractive for that next opportunity? So I think it's very much two-way street. It's always helpful if the employer has something in place from which they can react upon or work on that helps them get that information known. And certainly, yeah, that is a difference. I would say that large organizations, though, as well, struggle sometimes having really qualified successors. And in both organizations, WSIB and now Payments Canada, we have a concept of who can step in an emergency or the winning the lottery situation and keep the lights on versus who can step in to be that ultimate successor. And in both cases, we've had cases where there was somebody that could, of course, keep the lights on for now, but to move the organization and the strategy forward, you might have to go external, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. And interestingly with Scott, so Scott made the transition from CFO to Chief Corporate Officer last fall. And, you know, clearly I'm going to hope that Morneau, who does portions of this for a living, do you guys drink your own Kool-Aid? So how formal are your programs? And did this play a part in your transition from CFO into this more broader role?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. It certainly did. And I think, I would say moving from, like I said, in my early days, the bigger corporations, we had, very robust succession planning. Morneau, when I got there, was a little more, I would say, as a public company, we had to. There's a governance component of new CEO, new CFO, new head of HR, those kinds of things. But it was really, I would say, one-off and not really part of the day-to-day of living of it. Now, part of it was we had just made a major acquisition and the business had doubled and most people were new in role. So there's a bit of stage and timing. But as, over time in my particular case, I started out as CFO and then I, grabbed over the years, in no particular order, IT, strategy, M&A, legal, I don't know, and a couple of other things. And so that led to a conversation, quite frankly, with our CEO and just around the company kept getting bigger and my role kept getting bigger. And we had the very honest conversation about how many more years do you want to do this? And I gave him a number that sounded more like 5 to 7, not 15 to 20. Which, I think is part of succession, right? Is there's a company driven portion and then there's an employee driven portion. Right. And so we had that conversation and that led us to, okay, so how do we create a reasonable succession for me? And what became the obvious answer after a little bit of thinking was the easiest spec to fill of my role was the finance one. Right. And so we went out and recruited a new CFO who took strategy, M&A, and finance, and I kept basically everything else I'd gotten, plus, as you said, some transformation and global growth initiatives. So I think it's worked out really well for everybody. But that's kind of the nature of how it worked.
It's very good. And again, it's like you're the advocate. It's like you became the catch basin. Oh, give it to Scott. Scott will look after that. Give Scott IT, give him this, give him that. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, and you have to make the move. You're the one who has to step up and, put the line in the sand and say, what are we doing here? Yeah. And again, the growth of your organization would be a textbook example of how you better have broad shoulders in some of these organizations, because if you do something well, it's very typical that they're going to ask you to do something else. That's universal today. And I wonder when we think about the need, and a lot of companies are much leaner today than they were 3 months ago. We have to factor this as a reality in terms of the way companies are operating today. So when you think about the need for a more formal plan, and let's think about this as it goes deeper into an organization, because I think that we've all seen examples today where, it can be a frontline employee who you need backup in that space, or you're going to be in trouble. So how do you do that from a cost point of view? It's expensive to hire people, to have someone in the wings, to have that kind of person who can do more than they're doing today, because in time that they will have to take on more. So when you think about formal plans, and if you don't have a plan in place, what are the key criteria? So maybe Christine, give us your point of view, because you made a great point earlier that some of it is formal and some of it is informal. So if you were dispensing advice to a company today, both in terms of senior level and, let's say, more middle of an organization, what are the key components of a program that someone needs to be concerned with?
Yeah, and I don't really believe every organization has to have this huge, expensive, formal process.
Right.
Like I said, when I had my early opportunities, we didn't have a huge formal process. We're a large organization, so I think in our organization, we need a structured, formal process when you're looking at a head office and 3 subsidiaries, and it's a bit more complex. So I think in our organization, we needed the formal process in order to really move forward and get people's involvement, not just HR involved. Everyone needs to be involved. So I'll talk more about just my thoughts on smaller organizations that, like you say, maybe don't have the funds to fund a formal succession planning process. Just keep to the basics. There's lots of information out there. You don't have to hire an expensive person to embark on this. Just think logically. What are those positions, as I mentioned earlier, that you really, you'd be really struggling if that person won the lottery, so to speak. Look at those hard to hire positions. Look at that. We have in our organization actually hired people probably like really, really, really hard to hire positions a year or 2 years ahead, because they were so critical. We're not talking finance, office, but all organizations have their operations and those really critical. So really focus on those first. But then I also want to mention what every manager can do in an organization is look at their department, look at the pipeline that they have. That's one of my objectives as, moving into the CFO position is, we really need to build that pipeline so that the analysts that we've got a good selection of analysts that are training to be the supervisors or the manager positions. And then the directors. Like, if you have a good pipeline, you are 3/4 of the way there to getting those positions filled internally. I think obviously you always can't go internally. You have to hire externally as well. And I think that's important. I think you need a balance. You need fresh ideas. You need to hire externally for some key positions. But if you have that blend of both internal and external, I think your organization is going to be just that much more healthier and stronger. So don't think big. Oh my God, this is going to be, so expensive for us to think about it. Think small. Do baby steps. And then it'll roll. You'll just get on that treadmill and you'll develop it.
That's great. I'm really curious about, again, when we think about the size of organization, and Pam, you have the perspective here of working in both. So when you think about it from where you are today, what if you don't have that backup? You don't have that depth of talent. The personnel side is limited. I think you have, I forget the numbers, about 250 employees ish. So it's more challenging, I would imagine, in that environment. And when you do get caught and someone wins $60 million, like you said, it creates panic, I would think, in a sense, for certain parts of the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I think while I was still hearing the reverberations of the panic over a year after when I joined the company, it was still like a huge conversation. And so that's where, you have to think about, is there somebody external? Is there somebody who's been here a long time at our organization? Fortunately, that was, I think, more the Payments Canada case. Someone had been at the organization a long time and had done that role previously. So they kind of brought a couple of people back, if you will, into those critical roles. You know, the individuals who happened to win the $60 million, some of them stayed on for longer, maybe not working full time, but they did stay on for longer. In a more recent example, our chief information officer decided that he was moving on and put in his resignation unexpectedly 2 weeks before we began working from home in the pandemic environment. That's a big loss for an organization like ours that is very technology based, going through a huge modernization program, and now all of a sudden we find ourselves at home locked up. And so in that case, what we did was we didn't just have one person. We have one person taking care of more of the operations side of the house and another individual who's more in charge of the technology side of the house. And that's absolutely fine for now. And we put our formal search process on hold for that position. Now, as we get into, this is sort of more of a normal cadence, we're not in that emergency period, we're revisiting how we are going to approach the CIO role. But that's a big unexpected loss at a bad time, just like the lottery winners were. And so you can't always plan for things, but to the extent that we can, we have now gone much deeper into the organization on those critical roles, and then down to at least the director level for every other role in the organization. Now with 250 people, that's not a huge list compared to others, like my colleagues on the line here. But it's possible to do. You have really smart people that work for you. You can cascade the decision tree and accumulate all of that together as we collaborate working from home.
That's great. And there's a lot of similarities in between how you're approaching it and what Christine was describing. And so, Scott, from your point of view, when you guys are looking at whether you want to call it mission critical, I mean, in the past couple 3 months, my guess is your organization has had roles that you have to go to market on, you have to fill. How have you handled it? I mean, how do you onboard people? How is that whole part of the equation working for you? And you must get insight as well from a client point of view, and how they're handling different things in that regard. Like, it's not normal times. And we've seen companies get very creative in terms of how they go through the process of selection and hiring and onboarding and actually making people productive, and never, in some instances, having met face to face. So how is Morneau handling this right now over the past couple of months?
Yeah, and I think, a couple things. We're busier than we thought we'd be in certain areas, and we're not as busy as we thought we'd be in other areas. So net, we're neutral to slightly favorable through all this. But that's caused us to be really creative. And so one of the things we first did was, it's a little bit about succession, but it was about identifying emergency success first for all key roles. Right. That it's like, because we weren't sure, especially in the early days, how broad based this could become and what kind of absenteeism we could have in our own staff. So we kind of prepared for that, and we did a few things, like I've got somebody who's on my team in transformation, who's actually sitting in one of the operations teams as basically bench strength. So, right. She sits in on their weekly ops meetings, even though she doesn't have a defined role, but it's like, if somebody gets sick, this person's going to go do that. I'm like, okay, so we've done a little bit of that. Recruiting's been interesting. I mean, there's lots going on. I mean, I'm in the middle of a search right now, and I've met more candidates by Zoom and Teams than I would have thought. And it's interesting. Like, I think there's certainly some benefits, but there's certainly some limitations. So I think that's a trade-off. And then like I said, we've been really busy in a couple of areas, and we've had to redeploy resources out of other areas of the organization and just basically call people up and say, I know you're at home and you're not that busy with what we've got going, but could you work on something else? And people have said, sure, I'd love to. because people don't really want to sit around for the most part. So yeah, we've had to be really nimble.
It's great. When you think about internal versus external,
Mhm.
and as it relates to perhaps internal movement, someone getting promoted, or going external to bring someone new into the organization, are there things that you think about today that you didn't think about 3 or 4 months ago? Are there things that you could, almost from an advice point of view, offer to a candidate to enhance their chances in this new approach that we have to use to vet people and vet candidates? It's a very different experience today.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, Christine, maybe you first, if you have had anything different in terms of how you are looking at internal development or external.
I would say just because of COVID-19, I don't really see a difference in who I'm looking for, 6 months ago versus now. I think my approach is consistent. I think that there's challenges, like Scott mentioned, kind of tough to bring in and have that face-to-face. I have had experiences in the past, many years ago, prior to me joining this organization, where I actually hired someone on just a conference call and never actually met them. And I'll never do that again. So yeah, there's something to say about looking someone in the eye and just having that connection with someone. I think that's important today, every bit as much as it was 6 months ago. So that's where I don't think it's really changed, other than I think I'm probably more open to the hiring process via Skype or Zoom or something, because I'm now used to it. Do all of our meetings that way, and it's not as bad as I thought it probably would have been. So that would probably be the only difference, is I'm more open to completing a hiring this way than I was 6 months ago. Although I probably still would ask them to come in and see me face to face, 6 feet apart, of course, but I probably still would before the final offer.
That's it. Pamela, what about on your end?
I think Christine made a lot of really good points, and I think that openness going forward of conducting more interviews by Skype will actually open up the candidate pool more. So if I'm sitting in Toronto as I am now, and I'm hiring for an Ottawa-based role, then you know what, if I can't get up to Ottawa, then that's okay. And that I think allows more flexibility, and perhaps indeed more flexibility at looking in geographical locations where there might be great candidates, not where your physical office is located. I think all of our organizations, it sounds like, have demonstrated that by and large, they can operate many or most of their roles. We're actually 100% worked from home. There's no one in our office. So we can be open to more. And I think maybe that's a good thing. That's going to offer a lot more labor mobility as we emerge, hopefully sooner rather than later, from the current situation.
That's it. That's well put. There was a question here that I want to go to for Pamela. And they're asking if Payments Canada would be considered a critical asset of the country. And as such, does that demand a more formal and deliberate stance on succession planning? And do you interact with other components of, let's say, the federal government, where there is an obligation on your part to be able to evidence that you can operate under sort of any scenario?
Great question. So we are considered as part of the essential services list. And in addition to that, our payment systems are considered critical or prominent payment systems as of what's called a financial market infrastructure for the country. Our regulators are the Bank of Canada and Department of Finance in Ottawa. And absolutely, I would say that we have a pretty high standard from a risk management perspective. And even for a relatively small organization of 250 people, we have a chief risk officer and a risk management function. And so that has been pretty important. I would say that the pandemic, well, first of all, the lottery win, much more positive, prompted more work than had been done before. And I'm not sure what extent to which we did that before. And then this pandemic has caused us to be even more robust in looking at our individuals. And that was, you know, operating the payment system for Canada, it's vital. If we don't operate, the economy literally stops. And so that has become a very critical part of our regular executive committee discussions. Absolutely.
Another question directed to you, Christine, related to how the organization is handling forward planning and thinking as it relates to hiring when there is such a crunch on revenue, such a crunch on your operation, your ability to operate right now. And is there something within those two things that perhaps is on the table as a discussion point for the organization?
Good question. Unfortunately, we're kind of in a hiring freeze due to our financial situation. So we are still hiring for critical positions, mainly frontline. There are some, we also are a very capital intense organization. So we're building expansion projects. You know, there's a lot of capital programs that are on the go and they continue. So they haven't been halted. We have looked at, you know, skinning down our capital program where we can, or delaying it until we figure out how we're going to get out of this mess. But I think that we are still, you know, pretty much our hiring is paused right now. There are a few positions, as I mentioned, that we are going ahead with that really have to be filled in order for us to continue the work that we do in keeping our services on the street. I will mention one thing though, and it just came up at a meeting this morning, is the attrition of our frontline workers. So, and this is something that someone had actually mentioned, that quite often it's very normal after a pandemic like this, or after a crisis that we're going through, it's not uncommon for people to decide to leave their jobs, to retire earlier than they would have, that kind of thing. So we're really keeping an eye on our attrition of our operators because of course we're putting the service on the road. We are essential service. We have to keep our service on the streets. But if our attrition increases more than we thought it would, then we're going to have to hire more operators. And when you hire a bus operator, it takes a long time to get them trained. And right now we've canceled our training. So we need to figure out how can we train those operators under our new environment, our new health advisories, you know, how do we do that? Because we're going to have to start thinking about that really quick as we don't know what the attrition is going to be. So some hiring still going on. Absolutely, the frontline workers are critical to keeping our service, which is critical to the region.
Okay, that's an interesting development, right? Like, who would have thought you'd be contending with that right now? I did want to let everyone know that we are open for Q&A now. There is a tab at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to just type in your question, and I've been going to a couple of them here right now. There's one here, Scott, I'd like to address to you, which is Morneau is a publicly traded company. And what part does the board play in demanding a succession plan, and has it become more of a heightened item on agenda as the past couple of months have transpired?
Yeah, so short answer is yes, we have a formal process at the board for essentially the C-suite and identifying candidates at the next level who are likely to become part of the C-suite. And so we've done that for as long as I've been there. And that is a formal process that the board is actively involved in. They don't get involved below that. I mean, to the points made earlier, we have succession work we do on critical roles, but that's not really from a board perspective, other than them being aware that there is one. That's the limit of their expansion or their understanding. And then the really nothing specific changed with COVID. I mean, you know, our normal cycle is we review at the November board meeting. So it's fairly fresh. And so there was really nothing further in the March or May meetings.
That's great. Pamela, a question from the audience as well, related to, are you looking for different competencies in people today than you may have prioritized pre-COVID?
That's a good one. I would say not. I would say similar to Christine's earlier comments, I don't think my approach to hiring has changed. What we have changed a little bit, though, in the current circumstances, if anyone, so not just my own team, if anyone is looking to onboard somebody at this time, they need to demonstrate, answering a few questions, an additional layer, if you will. They need to demonstrate that they have the ability to bring the individual on in a successful way. And so you can get them the equipment and tools they need. They can access the training or the people that they need to talk to. And that's a bit of a challenge right now, to onboard somebody without them being part of the organization. And we are a very social organization and very socially minded. And so that's a challenge. And so I would say we've added that extra layer. I don't think I'm looking for any different leadership or characteristics in terms of candidates that I think would be great and suited for a role. So I think maybe that's good news. It's just in this time in particular, can we onboard you and you have a good onboarding process and a successful outcome in your new role? And so that's really where we're focused.
So that is a perfect segue to another question that I'd like Christine to tackle. We do a lot of work across Canada as a search firm, and we are often moving people from market to market. And that has become more challenging today. We have clients, let's say on the island, who require talent that may exist here in Toronto. And the idea of moving today is a bit more problematic than it has been. There are many factors as to why. As a hiring authority within your organization, has the topic come up that, do these people need to be in the office? Have you opened your mind to remote working as more of a permanent solution and as a way to access talent in a different way than having them show up every day to the office?
Yeah, funny you should bring that up. We actually had started embarking on looking as an organization to how we can have flexible work arrangements. We have at head office, we have quite a younger staff, I would say, a lot of planners and, people that probably live downtown versus in the suburbs. And so it's come up also from a recruitment perspective. I think the younger than me generation expects organizations to be flexible when it comes to, and given our technology, to be able to work from home if able to. So we already had embarked on what that looks like. So we already started a study, did a bunch of surveys, interviewed a whole bunch of people. What would that look like? And then bang, all of a sudden we had to have everyone work from home. I can say, me personally, I absolutely thought we had to, as an organization, do this. We had to be flexible. We had to look at what our environment is, what the workforce is expecting from organizations. So I believed we had to look at it. I can actually say I thought, but not finance staff. I figured, oh no, we need to collaborate. We need to, we got the tools here and all of that. Wow, was I proven wrong. We don't have hardly any finance staff in the office. Everyone's working from home. And thankfully to our IT department, they made it happen. So what now we're looking at as we go to the recovery phase, as what we call in BC, the BC Restart Plan that the province has put into place, we're now looking at how do we bring people back to the office, okay? But we don't want to bring everyone back to the office to then finish our work on the flexible work arrangements to then start, sending some people back home. So we're taking this opportunity over the next few months is to really finish that study, look at what that means. What does that mean by department, by position, by, what are those? And then that will help, or that will contribute to how we then start bringing people back home. I think, or back to the office. I think organizations back home. Yeah, well, I'm in the office, so I'll go back home when everyone else comes to the office. Anyway, so it was really good timing that we had already started that, and I think most organizations are probably doing the same thing. That's what I'm hearing in the media, anyways, is that people are doing just fine. We're very productive at home, so it will absolutely have a difference in how we move forward.
Scott, do you believe that because there is less to focus on, meaning if you're in more of a lockdown situation, you're working from home, clearly there would be a higher degree of productivity. Can that last? If people remain working remotely and the world gets back to a higher degree of normalcy, can we expect the same level of productivity? We have the same discussions internally, and we measure productivity as an organization pretty aggressively. And we've seen the same thing you said, Christine. We've seen higher level of productivity at virtually all hours of the working day. And unfortunately, it's extending more because people do have the time, they have the access, and there is a little less for some folks to do. So I'm wondering, Scott, if there's any value to that thought, and would it impact how you would, or where you would want an employee located?
I think it's mixed, Stephen, to be honest. I think, and we've been having these very conversations. I'm sure it's the same as others, right? And so, our CHRO's line was, my introverts are loving this, which is, which is a fascinating perspective, but, getting more productivity because they're not being, interrupted by all the extroverts. So there's some element of, quiet alone time that does drive productivity. On the flip side, there's a little less, interaction, and, in terms of one-on-one kind of things and informal meetings, I would say. And then we've got some people who really struggle working from home because of spouse, kids, pets, 4 roommates, you name it, right? Like there's all kinds of reasons why, it's not ideal. We have about 400 people in India, and one of the challenges there was most people don't have central air conditioning in their home, but they do in their office. And the summer's coming, right? So it's going to be interesting. And they're in a hard lock. Like we have very little to do with it in India. It's a hard lockdown, and it's driven by the state and federal government. So it's we'll do what we can do, but that's, so those are some real world stuff. And I think it varies significantly by individual and by function.
So Pamela, would you be more open to a candidate working wherever today as a full-time employee? And I think about that from the point of view of the candidate base today. And, this whole experience of, the 4 of us, or the hundreds of people on this call, connected this way, having a good discussion, it's really changed how we interact work-wise. It truly has, and we've all been able to pull it off, which is pretty remarkable. So when you think about, critical roles, does it matter if they're in Ottawa? Does it matter if they're or are you more open maybe to that person located in Gander, Newfoundland, for God's sakes? Like as long as they have the requisite skills and the ability to do what you need them to do, does location matter so much anymore?
That's a good question. And in fact, we have a couple of employees that are located in British Columbia. We have one who is located in Nova Scotia. I think where the change comes in, and first to answer your question, I think I'm more open to it than I have been. This has been an eye-opening experience for sure. The change will occur in that we were also demanding of those employees to travel to Ottawa and to Toronto regularly. And indeed, back and forth, Porter used to love us, back and forth between Ottawa and Toronto was a regular thing. We too are suffering from revenue declines. And so one of the first areas to go is travel and living expense. And so we are looking at remote employees. I think we're a lot more open to it. And we're also saying, if you're remote, you're remote. Don't expect that you'll have the face-to-face. And I'm still a big believer that the three-dimensional interaction that you only get face-to-face is really still very important for team cohesion. And we connect to our teams all the time. We had a Let's Talk this morning with the entire complement of staff. I still think there is value in face-to-face, but maybe not on a daily basis. Maybe you can do that on a more measured basis. And then therefore you can access this wonderful pool of talent that we have right across the country that maybe was very geographically restricted. And I know coming into COVID, there was a huge conversation happening about the war on talent and how we were all vying for the same resources. Payments is a very scarce resource, as it is in many of my colleagues here. And so if you can widen the pool or widen your ability and be more flexible, then I think that's actually going to benefit a lot of businesses and productivity overall.
That's great. Christine, another question for you, and thinking back on your own personal experience, when you are working with a candidate internally, let's say, on a route of succession, how much do you let that candidate know about where your hopes and where your aspirations are for them? And how much is it more where you identify talent, you look for core competencies or whatever it is that you're measuring, and you put them on the path without an end game in sight? Can it work either way? And sometimes we dangle the carrot and it doesn't necessarily get us the best result.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, in your own experience, how you handle that, or how you have handled that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, you know, as an organization, we struggle with that because you don't want to, oh yes, hey, you know, you're targeted or you're chosen to be succession for this position. And the expectations are there's a guarantee. So there's never a guarantee. Succession plan doesn't mean here is your path, here is your roadmap. If you do this, you will get here. In my personal opinion, there's never a guarantee. What you're doing is you're working with employees to set them up to be more successful as a candidate for a position. So a lot of times, even if you have been earmarked as a potential successor to a position, usually we still post. So most often we still post the position rather than appoint a position. And they are in a better position to be successful at it because of what we've done through the years, or, you know, however long, to get them to develop into a candidate for that role. And I think that's very important, because if you set the expectation up when you work with the staff, when you work with these people, that they are going to get that position, if they don't, they're out the door, for one thing.
Right.
And they're unproductive, they're completely disconnected. And even though maybe down the road it might work out one day, you've lost them. You've lost them from, you know, every way you can possibly think of. So that's a really, really important point.
That's great.
I think personally, you also need to probably let them know, maybe through personal objectives, your yearly reviews. You know, I think that you're doing really well. I think that you'd be a good candidate, you know, in other jobs, and work with them like that. But absolutely don't set expectations that it's a given.
It's great. You know, I wanted more from each of you. We have got 4 or 5 really solid questions that perhaps what we'll do afterwards is we'll circulate them and we can get your feedback on them. But unfortunately, we're down to our last minute, and we do like to start and finish on time. So on behalf of Robert Half Executive Search, I'd like to thank Pamela Steer, Christine Dacre and Scott Milligan for their participation today. Your feedback was on point, and I love the mix of experience that we have here. Some of it formal, some of it less formal, all of it very practical. And I think that we really selected three great people here who gave an enormous amount of insight into what we need to be concerned about succession-wise, B, what it means to candidates today in the market, and all of this newness that we're all experiencing. You all had something to say on that, and I think that's just super helpful. So on behalf of our organization, Robert Half, we'd like to thank you all for participating, and thanks to all of our attendees, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.